All right, hello everyone. We are about to start Unit 2, which is population and migration and the patterns and processes that affect those. I know I sound sick and I probably look super sick as well. So please bear with me as we get through this first topic, which has 3 objectives. I know some of you are going to think that's a lot, but you're going to have 3 different notes pages for topic 1. Our first topic is going to be on population distribution, and all of that is where people live. So it's how the population of a certain area or space is distributed over that space. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the factors that affect that and the impacts that population distribution has socially, economically, politically, and environmentally. So, population distribution, like I just said, it's where people live. That's going to be our focus here. Objective number 1. Identify the factors that influence the distribution of human populations at different scales. So we're looking for the factors that determine where people live and how those factors change at different scales. So how they change globally, nationally, regionally, and locally. So here we go. The number one thing that I want you to keep in the back of your mind or in the forefront of your mind, wherever you want to keep it, just as long as it's there, is that people want to live in places where they can survive with relative ease and comfort. And so that's going to determine where people in the beginning settled and where people choose to live today. They want to live where they can survive, number 1, but with relative ease and comfort. They don't want to just survive by the skin of their teeth. They want it to be easy and comfortable. So, the physical factors influencing population distribution. First of all, you have to have your basic needs, your food, water, shelter. So obviously, you are going to live where you can get those things. And obviously, in hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, when people are settling, those become like the main reasons people are settling. But those are some of the physical factors. You need food, water, and shelter. But you also want a good climate. And so what I'm showing you here is that most people live in what we call the mid-latitudes. And you're going to need to know what those are. But the mid-latitudes are from 30 degrees. They're on lines of latitude, if you couldn't tell. But it's from 30 degrees north to 60 degrees north, and from 30 degrees south to 60 degrees south. Most of the world's population can be found within those lines of latitude because they're low-lying areas. They have access to fresh water and access to natural resources. And so here's a map of world population. And so you can kind of tell here is the first section of mid-latitudes, and then the second one is down here. So you can kind of see how that matches up. Now, this does not mean that nobody lives here, but it just says that most people in the world live in the mid-latitude sections of the globe. So when people first settled around the world, they settled in places because of the location's natural features. Like, what can this location give me? Okay, it can give me good climate, it has water, it has food, we can provide shelter, we have access to these natural resources, so this is where we're going to settle. But over time, we don't settle that way now, because pretty much everywhere we go is going to have these things because people have already been there and settled it. So then, once the globe starts evolving humanitarian-wise and economically, people themselves actually become the attraction, and that's what causes people to settle in different places. So the human factors influencing population distribution. Number one, safety. When people were settling, 100, 150 years ago, um, you didn't just want to take your family and settle by yourself. It's easier to come under attack that way and stuff like that. So if you're with more people, you have more protection. That was kind of the frame of mind. More particularly today, we settle where we can find jobs. We move to where our friends and family are. That's especially true for immigrants coming over. And that's the reason that we have things called ethnic enclaves, or like places like Chinatown, where it seems like when immigrants come over here, they go and they live in these ethnic enclaves with people who are from the same place as them or speak the same language as them. Well, it's probably because that's where their friends and family live, and so that's where they're going to go. People are also going to settle near transportation networks, so roads, train lines, rivers, places like that. People aren't generally going to settle where you have to hike in the middle of the woods to get there, right? Like, you're going to settle where you have easy access to other places. And then political decisions are also a human factor that influence population distribution. An example of that are military bases. This picture over here is the Alert military base in Canada, and it's actually the northernmost settlement in the entire globe. You can look up where it's at. I just didn't put it on here, but you can Google where it actually is on the globe. But it's in Canada, and it was put here to keep an eye on the British. I mean, not the British, to keep an eye on the Russians. And so, like, literally the only reason that people live here is because it's a military base. And I mean, people are living here, so that's population distribution. But they didn't just settle there on their own. It was a political decision, and that affected where people live, and people have to live there now. And so that's where it is. That's an extreme example. Obviously, they're not all that remote, but that is an interesting one. And then cultural or political situations also influence population distribution. An example of that is persecution of religious groups, and it forces them to resettle. The Mormons in Utah, that was like a forced kind of migration because they were being persecuted. So now a majority of the Mormons in the United States do live in Utah. Or like the Amish, those are all examples of cultural or political situations that influence population distribution. So, the basic principle that people want to live on the most desirable land applies at any scale or level of analysis. As the scale of inquiry changes, or that can also be the scale of analysis, the relevance of certain factors such as climate, elevation, and industrialization changes as well. So all this is saying is those factors that we just talked about, how important they are, changes based on scale. So here we go. At a global scale, high altitude areas usually have limited populations. So that's a climate factor. Simply because it's cold and it's hard to live there. But if you looked at it at like a national scale, climate can even vary greatly within a certain state. So just because at a global scale people aren't really living in super high altitude areas doesn't mean at a national scale where people are living that they're avoiding the high altitude areas. It just changes based on scale. Because if, let's say, for example, the United States is in the mid latitudes, it's pretty low lying, but that doesn't mean like we don't have mountains and stuff, right? Where people actually do live. And so that is what I'm talking about whenever I say it changes from scale to scale. And then at a local scale within a city, that changes itself as well. Spatial climate variation is usually too small to affect settlement, so it usually doesn't affect at a local scale. This is a world population. I'm just about to show you how it can looks when population changes at scale. So this would be population density at a global scale. This would be national, looking at the different states. So a national map scale at a state local, and then here it is at a national map scale with a county local level of analysis. So that's just showing you how the distribution changes um, within scale um, of within different scales of analysis. So human factors that affect scale of analysis. The best way for me to explain this to you, I think, is an example. So I'm just going to show you this. So polluted air is a health hazard, yet it may signalize, or I said signalize, that's not a word. It may signal industrialization, economic development, and employment opportunities. And so although like no one's gonna be like, oh yeah, I want to live in a super polluted area, when you weigh those factors at a certain scale, like the importance of a job and a good economy in people's minds outweighs like living in pollution. And so it says on a global or national scale, millions of people are often attracted to areas of economic opportunities, and they might willingly move to that polluted city or whatever. But within the city, at a city scale, few people intentionally choose to settle near a pollution source unless they have to live there because of lower property values and poverty. So yeah, at like a global or national scale, people are going to gravitate towards those polluted areas, not because they're polluted, but because they offer economic opportunity. Doesn't mean that once they get in the city that everyone wants to live in the most polluted part of the city. They're going to try to avoid that in the city scale, but at the global and national scale, they are going to gravitate towards it. So that's just one example, but I felt that was the best way for me to explain that to you. So that was objective number 1. Make sure you get your summary down and then move on to objective number 2.